There we go. All right, that's better.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Big Douglas Show. My guest today is Andy Pollin. Andy, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Doug?
I'm doing well. This is your first time on the show, and I appreciate you giving me a little time today.
Good to be here.
You have been around. Let's start this way. Caleb Powell, we do a card giveaway each week. Caleb Powell was the winner today, so we'll shoot that off to you. Andy, each day I do a random question. Today was ranking offensive tackles. On the list, I have Jonathan Ogden, Anthony Munoz, Orlando Pace, and Trent Williams. What do you think?
Well, the Trent Williams is not complete. Anthony Munoz has generally been acknowledged to be the best. And more the Orlando Pace, and what was the fourth one?
Orlando Pace and Jonathan Ogden.
Jonathan Ogden, yeah. I mean, I guess Pace had a little bit longer career. Ogden played on a Super Bowl winner. Did Pace play on the Rams team that won in 2000? I don't remember.
I think he did.
Okay, so I would give Ogden maybe a slight nod over Pace, and Trent Williams an incomplete because, you know, he has not finished his career and so far hasn't won a Super Bowl.
Andy, you have been around the DMV for quite some time now. I'm curious your thoughts on some of the greats that you have been around and some that you maybe recognize as the up-and-coming greats from the area, because the area has put out so many great broadcasters and journalists.
Is that what we're talking about? Journalists here, people who come from this area? Yeah. I mean, it is really remarkable. As a matter of fact, I was setting up Scott Van Pelt for a charity event in a few months from now. And I was thinking about, you know, the great success that he's had and coming from Montgomery County. And I was thinking if you started to do a Mount Rushmore of this, that you might think about putting him on it. James Brown, for sure. Warner Wolf, who maybe before your time is kind of like the godfather of modern sports broadcasting as far as I'm concerned. So he's come from this area. And then, you know, just the many people who've done different things, from Chick Hernandez, who continues to do, he's doing national games now. Steve Buckhantz, who's had an unbelievable career. The people who have come through here, you know, whether it was pre or post ESPN from, you know, my friend Dave Feldman or, you know, Brett Haber. I mean, you could just keep going. Rachel Nichols, who's had great success in broadcasting and had a long run at ESPN. She's from here. You know, it's for an area. It's a big metropolitan area, understood, but the number of people who've had national success with this is real incredible.
Are there a couple that you see doing it now that you kind of look at maybe getting the torch passed to them? Are there some that you see now that you are impressed by?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really keep tabs on who's, you know, considered an up and comer, but probably Stuart Scott would be identified as the face of ESPN, but not far behind is Scott Van Pelt. And the numbers that I saw, and they put this out on Twitter the other day, he is beating in the demographic. And by the demographic, I mean, you know, the men, the age group that they're trying to reach. He's beating the late night shows, you know, the Tonight Show and all the, I don't know, I don't stay up late, so I don't know all of them. But I mean, just absolutely remarkable success that he's had. And it's because he is one of those people who can be himself on television, and it just works. I mean, he just is able to do something that many people are not able to do, and he has accomplished that. As far as, you know, young broadcasters, I don't know, you know, what ESPN is really doing, and really in terms of sports broadcasting nationally, that's it. Otherwise, it's very much splintered with people doing podcasts. There are some regional things that are out there. I'll tell you, there's a guy named Tim Murray who started with us at 980 as an intern, and now is doing national broadcasting for an outfit that's run by Brent Musburger, and it's gambling related. And that's an outlet that didn't exist 5 years ago, and he's an up and comer in that, and has done very well with it. So, I think you just got to look at all over the country, and you see some kind of connection to this area, and it's absolutely incredible.
What do you think? You've been in the space for a long time. What do you think are the biggest, most notable changes from the time maybe that you got started till where we're at now?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started in radio, and I started in 1978 in a small town called Port Arthur, Texas. It's about 90 miles east of Houston. And at that time, was a traditional way to make it up through radio. You'd started in a small market and moved to a larger one, which I did. I went to San Antonio after a year, and I was in Dallas, and eventually made it to Washington and New York, and then back to Washington. And that path doesn't really exist anymore. Radio, while it still exists, it exists in a much different form than it did then. And even the news stations like WTOP, which has been a juggernaut and continues to be, even they've had to do some downsizing in recent years. And the reason is that people are not really listening in the way that they used to. There's podcasts to splinter it out. There's Sirius XM that they can go to. And, as far as getting information, you can get it on your phone in a matter of seconds. You don't have to wait for it to come up on the radio. And even the backbone of all news radio, weather and traffic, that's available on your phone as well. So there's a big change there. Television, the same thing. I mean, when I was growing up, we had 4 channels. We had the 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And here in Washington, it wasn't even Fox yet. It was called Metro Media TV. Channel 5 was an independent. Channel 20, maybe you could watch, they had some programming, and at various points they carried some sports. That was it. And then cable TV came along, but that's been around for a long, long time. And the dominance that cable TV had is now beginning to shrink. And as the cord cutting continues, and younger people are not necessarily watching television. So, everything is evolving right now. And like when I talk to young people about getting into broadcasting, I tell them, I rode in on a covered wagon, and what you're going to face is nothing like what I faced. And I don't know how it's all going to shake out. I can only tell anybody who's interested in doing this and encouraging them is that there's always going to be a need for content providers. People are going to be interested in good content. And if you can provide it, that's great. The distribution of it is something that's going to be figured out over a period of time. But we're in a great transition period right now.
What do you think is next? Do you have an idea of what the next movement will be in the space?
It's hard to say. I think that podcasting is getting some footing, but there are only a handful of people who are really making any money with it.
That's right.
It and I'm not preaching to the choir here, I guess, on that one. But the reality is, that unless you're Bill Simmons or Tony Kornheiser or somebody that's, dealing with hundreds of thousands of downloads a day, it's very difficult to do it. And whether it evolves to the point where, it was with radio, where certain podcasts will require many people to do it and podcast networks will exist, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm fortunate to have had my career when I had it. I say that all the time. And I'm in my mid-60s now, and I won't be doing this a whole lot longer. So I don't need it to last a lot longer as an employment outlet. But as a consumer, I'm going to be interested to see. Now, I'm different than even people my age who tell me they listen to my radio show on podcasts. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm on the radio for 2, sometimes 3 hours a day. And the listening that I do is pretty much in my car when I'm coming and going to work. And then I don't really listen to radio after that. I watch some television. I watch a lot of sports. I watch some other shows that I'm interested in, and, all the popular shows like Succession and, other shows that are popular on the networks, on cable TV and sometimes Netflix. But that's really where I'm at. And I wonder, people coming along now, I look at my kids who are in their 30s, and they seem to do most of their listening on podcasts as well. I mean, they'll tell me about things that I'm on as a guest, or shows that I do myself on the radio that are turned into podcasts, and I look at them and say, well, that may be the way that this kind of medium is consumed in future years.
You've written books, done TV, done the radio. Do you have one that you prefer to the other?
Let's not get carried away with books. It's a book that was written, a book of lists that I did with Lenny Shapiro. I guess close to 15 years now. I was actually contacted about writing it. They had success with WIP, a couple of guys who put together the Great Philadelphia Book of Lists. And I was contacted by the publishing company, and they did this with other cities. And I know they didn't have the success that they had in Philadelphia, but it was a good project. I can't say it was incredibly lucrative, but it was something I'm glad I did, and something I have. I've done limited television, various shows over the years. Radio's been my life, and I've spent 45 years doing it. And I've never been at a point where it's television or radio. I've done television on the side, and I've always had a full-time radio job, sometimes two, and even in some cases three. But no, I've been a radio guy. That's put my kids through college. That's my life's work. And as far as if there really never was a choice, let's put it that way. And if I ever came to that crossroads, I don't know what I would have done, but it never really came to that.
All right, let's talk a little football. It would appear that Snyder is finally gone. I don't see any way around that. I asked you before we got started if you could think of the three biggest Snyder blunders while he's been here.
Wow.
Hard to get them down to three, I'm sure.
Yeah, look, I mean, the first big move that he made was firing Norv Turner in what was his second year as the owner. They had made the playoffs the first year, and he had promised Norv that he would bring them back if they made the playoffs. So they did, and the team was 7-6, still in contention to make the playoffs, and he fired him. And there was, although Snyder has denied that to me personally, and yes, I have done a couple of interviews with him over the years. It's been a long time, but he denied to me personally that he was going to hire Pepper Rogers. He hired Terry Robisky, who was on the staff, and he was the interim coach. And they wound up getting clobbered by both Dallas and Pittsburgh, knocking them out of playoff contention. Then the next move was something he was advised to do, and it would have been a good move had he stuck with it, but he hired Marty Schottenheimer, and he got impatient when Marty lost some games. He also didn't like the fact that Marty got say over everything, and after a year, Marty was gone. And had he stuck with Marty, I don't know if he would have won a Super Bowl with him, but they would have had a good foundation for a team. And he brought in Steve Spurrier, which at the time was a move that maybe could have worked. Some looked at it in the way that Bill Walsh was hired by the 49ers with an innovative offense, and maybe it was going to work. Well, that turned out to be a disaster. And I'd say the best move he's ever made was bringing back Joe Gibbs. But then Gibbs left after 4 years. And here's another big blunder. He waited and waited because he wanted to hire Steve Spagnuolo, and he wound up hiring Jim Zorn. Jim Zorn was in no way a head football coach. I don't even think he was offensive coordinator material. He spent his life as a quarterback's coach after a pretty decent playing career, and that was a huge mistake. And then you could. If you're looking for the top three, boy, that really is hard to do. I think you have to take them in chronological order. But there's been misstep after misstep after misstep. And when he took over in 1999, was a team that was 8 years removed from a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. The afterglow was still there, and there was a feeling that they could rebuild. And had he been patient, had he listened to the right people, had he not hired people like Vinny Serrato to be his right-hand man for 10 years, it might have worked. But, he decided that since he owned this team, he was going to meddle. He was going to do what he wanted to do. He was impulsive. And this is how he has taken a jewel franchise and basically turned it into ruins in less than a quarter of a century.
It's almost impossible to even contemplate how he did it in a business, in a model, in a league where it's designed not to fail. I mean, the blueprint is there. All you have. How is it? And he tried, I guess, to his credit, 4 or 5 different ways: meddling, not meddling, GM, coach centric. I mean, how is it that none of it worked, even if just by accident?
Well, yes, there have been times when they've tried to present it as he hasn't been meddling, but he's been meddling. It's been pretty clear behind the scenes. Sure. And the only reason that he's still there, because if you ran any other business the way he has run this one, you would be bankrupt. But the NFL is a cash machine. And before he even signs one check for a player or a team employee, he's given $400 million in media rights. The salary cap is up to what, about 250 million, 260 million right now. Let's call it 250. Means that he's got $150 million in cash after he's covered his entire player payroll. Right. I mean, you can't screw that up financially. Now, he has screwed it up from an image standpoint, but when you're continued to be floated by cash on that, it puts you in a pretty good spot. Now, the hope is that they will eventually choke him out with what he's accumulated in debt. He's accumulated over about $1 billion in debt in buying out his partners and taking on a debt that he was given as a waiver, which he has to pay back by 2028. But he could wait them out for that for a while. And as far as personal embarrassment, he seems to be beyond that. It doesn't seem to affect him where you have a stadium that's half full and 60% of those people that are there are rooting for the other team. There may have been some movement when his wife went out on Breast Cancer Awareness Day and was booed. There may have been a feeling, okay, this is it. Maybe the family prevailed on him. It's time to sell, Dan. But, each day we get different reports, and, the latest being that Snyder may dig in his heels. And if in fact they vote him out at the league meetings, that he could ask for an injunction, which could tie this up in court for years. I mean, who knows? Never underestimate the pettiness of this man and the vindictiveness. So you don't know how long he's going to go. He doesn't seem to mind paying lawyers, and lawyers are happy to take his fees and tie this up in the court. So we don't know. But at this point, all signs seem to be pointing to him selling. But the latest from Don Van Natta puts a kind of a new wrinkle on this, in that you would think, okay, Roger Goodell as commissioner and fellow owners are going to put the screws to him and force him out. But if Roger Goodell was involved in a cover-up of a $55 million line of credit that he was obtaining from the Bank of America without the consent of his partners, which is a violation of the partner agreement and a violation of the NFL bylaws, then what does that say about Roger Goodell and whether or not he's culpable on anything that Snyder may do? So, you have to go deep into the weeds on this, but the levels of deceit and cover up and just bad business are so much there that it's going to take a long time to sort this out.
So you don't think the team will be sold by the end of the month when they have this owners meeting?
It doesn't appear that way. I mean, it seemed all nice and neat and tidy when people like Jay Glazer were reporting at the end of the season that they expected to have it wrapped up at the owners meetings. But the more reporting that comes out in this, the dirtier and dirtier it seems, and the more likely that there's going to be a drawn out legal fight in this, and the thought that maybe they can get this done in time for the league meetings seems a little bit far-fetched right now.
And all of the, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like all this does is tank the price of the team. I mean, it was like a month and a half ago when I bet you Snyder thought he was going to get $7 billion for this thing. And one, because you have to have the 30% up front, it limits the pool of who's in there. There will be teams for sale in the upcoming years. So, I mean, is Dan really just sinking his own stock here?
Well, I mean, never underestimate the pettiness and vindictiveness of him, and if in fact he is blocking Jeff Bezos from making a bid, that is the true definition of cutting off your nose to spite your face. And that if here's a man who could clearly come up with the 30% down that you're talking about. So if in fact he came up with an offer of $6 billion, which would be more than the latest high watermark reported at $5.5 billion, it'd be no problem. But maybe Snyder is saying, well, you put me in this position because you own the Washington Post, and the Washington Post's reporting led me to all these moves I've had to make, and now I'm being backed into a corner to sell. So the hell with you. I'm not going to allow you to make a bid. But it also could be, this is high level business. We're talking about billions of dollars. Maybe he's being advised to play it this way because that it ups the value of the team. And, how much does Bezos care if he pays, $6 billion or $6.5 billion? That's not a big amount of money to him. So I don't know. But we've gone enough years now. It's not like this past year was the first year that the stadium was an embarrassment. So what's another 2-3 years? I mean, and again, he's not going to financially sink, though his cash flow is a problem right now. He's not going to financially sink if he continues to draw 40,000 people at his stadium and have the lowest TV ratings. The question is, how much of an embarrassment is this for the league? How much of a problem is this for the league? And how much can the league do to finally force him out?
For forever, I guess it has changed a little bit now. Rich people did not go to jail for things like this. If the IRS starts getting involved, do you see a scenario where at least the threat of that can be used against Dan to get him out?
Yeah. As far as jail time, that's above my pay grade. I did talk to an attorney the other day on the air, and he even was unsure about that. It's bank fraud. In that he obtained this loan fraudulently, and the question is, how far does this go? We also may have had some involvement by the Bank of America in this. Right. Who knows how deep this goes? So if there is going to be bank fraud, are they going to be in trouble for this? Is the commissioner of the league going to be in trouble for covering this up? Also, it appears from the way that they were able to silence this so quickly within 4 days that there was dirt to be had on the partners that they perhaps didn't want to get out. And one of the partners is Dwight Scharr, or was Dwight Scharr, who is now permanently banned from ownership in the NFL because he was involved with that website in India, which was hired to spread dirt about Dan Snyder. So the level of deviousness on all sides, not just Dan Snyder, goes pretty far here.
The 30 for 30 will be incredible, as they say, right?
Let's talk a little bit. I mean, you really have to pay close attention to understand all the twists and turns of this one, for sure.
Assuming this thing gets sold and it gets sold to one of the couple of people we've heard, do you have a preference? Does who the new owner is make any difference to you?
No, I mean, not really. The guy, and his name always escapes me, the one who owns the 76ers and the Devils. What's that?
Harris.
Yeah, Josh Harris. Yeah, he's from Chevy Chase. I like that. He's got partial ownership of the Steelers, so he's been involved in the league. There won't be any trouble approving him. And from what I've read, he's hands off on everything. So that would seem to be good, but I've never met him. I don't know really much about him other than what I've heard. But remember, Dan Snyder was hired because he was local, and this will take some people back. If you're old, you'll remember this. He came in as a partner with the Milstein brothers, and he said, "Oh, I'm a limited partner. I'm silent. It's all their deal." And the league wasn't going to approve Edward Milstein, who was the leader of this group, because Milstein had been involved in suing a lot of people, and he had some involvement with the New York Islanders, which didn't go well. So the league said to Dan Snyder, "If you get yourself some investment help, we'll approve you." And I think there was an assumption that at 34, he was very dynamic and very, 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 I don't want to say slick, because that didn't describe it, but they thought, oh, wow, a guy who gets to this point at 34 and he's willing to pay that kind of money and he can come up with the financing, he's going to push us forward. And he did in raising the value of their franchise. But now it's come time to pay the piper, as they've seen the deviousness and the punch in the face that he seems to continue to give himself time after time after time.
Let's talk a little bit of football before we wrap. What is your assessment of Ron Rivera? Did you like him when they made the hire, and has he done anything to change your mind up to this point?
Well, he was hired to stop the bleeding. Right. That's one thing. I think at that point, although it was 7 months before the Washington Post report came out, I think they were snooping around at that point, and he knew what might be coming. So he needed to have somebody who could at least create the perception that he was cleaning things up. And, he knew that Bruce Allen had to go. As we're finding out, we already had the stuff about the emails with John Gruden and things like that. So his job was to create a better image for the franchise. And, he had a good reputation, and he had taken a team to a Super Bowl. But as we've come to find out, it's Mike Rizzo has a saying about baseball players when they're slumping and when they're really hot. He says it's the back of their baseball card. They ultimately reach the level that they're at. And Ron Rivera is a guy, aside from the Super Bowl season, who's been a mediocre coach. He's had 3 winning seasons in 12 years. Yes, he's won the division twice with 7 wins. There's some luck involved in that for sure. But there's no scandal around him. There's none of that. It's just that he's just a guy who's and once he's gone from here, I don't think he'll ever be a head coach again. But given the circumstances that he walked into, I think he's done about as good a job as you could possibly do. Now, his house isn't completely clean. His first hire was Ryan Vermillion, who wound up taking a plea deal from the FBI. So there's some skeletons dropping out of there too. But I would say overall, given what he's been dealing with, he's done a reasonable job. Should he have built a team that was good enough to be a playoff team this past year and maybe even a contender to go deep into the playoffs? Yeah, but it didn't work out. They swung and missed on quarterbacks several times. They from the jump, I don't know if the promise was made, but he said he was going to try and fix Dwayne Haskins. Well, that didn't work, and they passed on Justin Herbert and other teams did as well. It wasn't like, he went number 3, but they took a defensive end who sounds like they're done with already, with Rivera saying they're unsure about picking up the 5th-year option. And so they missed on that. They brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who thought he could be a bridge quarterback. He lasted 16 snaps. And then they swung and missed big time on Carson Wentz. And whether that was his move or Dan Snyder's move, in an expletive-filled delivery that he had on that, he claimed it was his move. Well, it's yours, and it's over, and it was a disaster. So now plan C is to go with a rookie quarterback who was taken in the 5th round, who's played exactly 1 game, may turn out to be the next Tom Brady, or may not, but they have no idea at this point. So, I would say that going into his 4th year, if he was in any other organization, he would have been fired. And they're because of the cash flow problems and the other issues, they're going to have him for at least another season. And who knows, maybe another season after that, if Snyder continues to to fight what he's up against.
It's interesting. I have always said that the GM and the head coach being the same person is so tough, simply because they have totally opposite jobs. I mean, when the head coach is trying to win right now, the GM's trying to set the team up to win in the future. How those things connect is so difficult. Do you prefer, do you like Ron as the GM or as the head of football ops, as the delegating man rather than the head coach, or they're the same guy and it's just average business?
But I mean, they've hired Martin Mayhew, who, what's his previous experience? San Francisco, how much of the player acquisition there was he responsible for? If he was in charge of that, he did a good job. He also worked in Detroit, which, it seems to go between really awful and pretty mediocre. And they brought in Marty Herney, who worked with, like most of his hires, someone he worked with in Carolina. But to your point, coach and GM almost has never worked. I think maybe Bill Walsh is about the best doing that. And I heard it explained this way, that let's say you have two offensive linemen and one of them has had his contract restructured, and he lines up next to another guy who just got a big bonus. And he looks over at his head coach, and if the head coach is both the general manager, well, he's pissed off because the head coach and general manager is paying the guy next to him more than he makes, and he thinks he's better. So, if you have a GM to be mad at, that may be an oversimplification of that, but that's a lot that goes into it. And when Mike Holmgren was in Seattle, he got the Seattle job off his success in Green Bay, and he said he wanted to be GM, and they let him do both for a while. And then they said, okay, this isn't working, so we're going to make you the coach, and we're bringing in a GM. And that team went to the Super Bowl. They didn't win the Super Bowl, but he got him there. And I think is regarded as a very good coach and probably a mediocre GM. So the times that has worked, the old Bill Parcells line, if you want me to cook the meal, you might as well let me shop for the groceries. Well, how many Super Bowls did he win doing that? He won 2 Super Bowls in New York with the Giants by butting heads with George Young. But that worked, didn't it? They were a hell of a team, and it was George Young who acquired the players, and Bill Parcells who coached them.
We'll get you out of here on this. Did you like the Bieniemy hire? Were you surprised by the press conference? And does it not matter if Sam Howell can't play? I mean, was Turner's inevitable demise more about the quarterback or his play calling? I don't know.
Well, who knows about his play calling, because apparently he wasn't doing it in Kansas City. It was Andy Reid. Do I think he can be successful as an offensive coordinator? Sure. Why not? And yes, his press conference was very impressive. And you wonder about these stories that he doesn't interview well. he with the old cliche, he won the press conference. He spoke like a head coach and was very impressive. How that's going to translate to the field, I don't know. And realize this, in his 5 years as an offensive coordinator, he had a quarterback who's now in the discussion of the greatest of all time. So, talk to the people who coached. Well, let's use an example. Steve Young versus Steve Bono. How much better do you look coaching Steve Young than Steve Bono?
That's right.
So when he comes here and he's got a 5th round draft pick, who all the sycophants who are still the few who are still believing in this team and say, oh, maybe he's the next Tom Brady. Well, maybe not. And maybe Eric Bieniemy working with Sam Howell is going to look a whole lot different than working with Patrick Mahomes.
No doubt. It will be interesting to see. Andy, I've been a fan for a long time, and I was excited that you agreed to come on today. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Nice to talk to you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Talk to you later.
All right, appreciate you.